Hi, I'm Heather Stadelman with Bernina of America, and welcome to Bernina Community Studio. Today we're going to be quilting this autumn wall quilt, and I will be using the Q16. First, you're going to need to piece your quilt top together with the pattern and information that has been provided. With this simple wall quilt, I wanted to highlight the quilting and not necessarily the quilt, but I did want to add a little bit of fun applique to this project as well, so that we can focus on doing some fun quilting with it. The applique, you will need to be sure to reverse your letters when you're tracing them onto your fusible. So be sure you do that. And then also when I'm stitching this down, I stitched my applique down with a blanket stitch on my Bernina 790 Plus. And with my blanket stitch, I actually like to adjust my stitch width and my stitch length just a little bit. And so for this particular project, I adjusted my stitch width to 3.0. as well as my stitch length to 3.0. And then I went ahead and did the blanket stitch, and I stitched around all of my letters as well as my leaves. I do like to use a tearaway stabilizer on the underneath side, so on the wrong side of the fabric, and this simply helps to support your stitches as well as your fabric, and it keeps everything laying nice and flat when you do blanket stitch applique. So after you get your quilt top pieced and all your pieces appliqued down, you're going to want to go ahead and layer your quilt top together, and then we're going to baste it. So I'm going to move this one out of the way, and we have our layered quilt top right here. And what I did is I layered this as well as pin basted it. So I pin basted it just enough to get it to the machine so that I can machine baste it. Now, on my Q16, I do have the stitch regulator mode 3, and with that I can do basting stitches. And so I like to do the basting stitches on the machine, and then I can take my pins out, especially if I'm doing ruler work quilting. I don't want to have these pins in here, and I don't want to try to lay my ruler over top of the pins. So I'm going to go ahead and get this ready to machine baste. So with that being said, on my Q16, there are a couple of things that I do like to set up on the machine before I start quilting. The first is I always want the machine to stop needle down. So I'm going to go ahead and select the needle down icon. And so every time I stop stitching, my machine will stop needle down. The next thing is with stitch regulator mode 3, I have the option for basting 1, 2, or 4 stitches per inch. So for this particular project, I'm going to do 2 stitches per inch. And I'm simply going to baste a couple of vertical lines and also a couple of horizontal lines. So with that, I'm going to show you real quick how I do this, and then you're going to join me back here after you get your quilt top basted. So I do like to start off the edge of the quilt, and I also like to bring up my bobbin thread. And then I'm simply going to start. And because this is basting stitches, it's going to take some great big stitches. Now here, I have come to a pin, so I do need to remove this pin out of my way and continue basting. And I'm simply going to grab my threads and use my thread cutter here at the side. And then I'm going to go and I'll do 1 horizontal line real quickly. And then after that, I want you to get your quilt top basted and join me back here. And we're going to talk about the echo quilting clips and the rulers and how some of those fun things work. And you can see I'm basting in a thread color that does not match my quilt top, so that I can see where I've basted. It's also easier to remove your basting thread when you're working. And again, remove a pin. Okay. Go ahead and continue basting your quilt top. Get all of your layers basted. I generally, on this, I know that our blocks finished at 8 inches, so I would probably baste every 4 to 6 inches, a horizontal and vertical line. Depends on how detailed of quilting you're going to be doing. For this project, we're not doing super detailed quilting, so we don't have to have the layers really tightly basted, just loosely basted. But get it basted together and get your pins out of the way, and join me back here at the machine, and we're going to talk about our echo quilting clips. Okay, so for this next part, after we've got our quilt top basted, we're going to start with doing some echo quilting. And I want to talk to you about our echo quilting clips. So with our echo quilting clips, they come in a package, and there are 3 different sizes here that are available. So those are the 3 sizes of our echo quilting clips. The one thing about attaching the quilting clips that you want to make sure that you're aware of is that if you feel the quilting clip, you can kind of feel a groove on the bottom side of it, and that is the bottom side of the quilting clip. And so you want to make sure that that's going to be down towards your quilt top. And then we're going to simply add our 96 foot into the quilting clips. Now for this project, I'm going to be using this smaller quilting clip. So I'm going to put these other 2 back in my package just so that I don't lose them. And I'm going to put them in my little storage drawer right here. Okay, my 96 foot and attaching this quilting clip. So I have felt this, and I've determined that this side is the bottom. And what I'm going to do is there are some reference lines on your 96 foot. There's also some reference lines on this echo quilting clip. I'm simply going to line up the reference lines on the foot with the reference lines on the clip, and I'm going to just push straight down and attach my echo quilting clip to my presser foot. And now that I have that attached, you should feel under here, and it should be all nice and smooth. There shouldn't be any kind of a lip or anything like that. So once you have attached your echo quilting clip to your presser foot, go ahead and put your presser foot back on, and we're going to start by doing some simple echo quilting around our lettering in this design. We will be using these rulers, but we'll be using them just a little bit later. So for this, what we're going to do is I've attached my quilting clip, and on this part for doing this quilting around this letter, I would recommend starting with the L's in the word fall first. They're going to be the easiest to echo quilt around. And so for that, I'm simply going to lower my presser foot, and I want to align the edge of my quilting clip up with the edge of my applique piece to do my first row of echo quilting. So I'm going to line it up. I'm going to bring up my bobbin. I'm simply going to reach under here. Got my bobbin and my top thread. I'm going to go ahead and take my securing knots. Okay, I'm going to raise my presser foot, and I'm going to take my scissors and just trim my threads away. All right, now I'm going to lower my presser foot, and I'm simply going to run the edge of this clip just along the edge of my fabric. And I'm using Stitch Regulator Mode 2 for this. You can use Mode 1 or Mode 2. And so now here where I've got it, where it's just aligned on both sides, you can see how easy it is to echo quilt around something and have a nice, consistent echo quilting. And because the edge of my clip is right against the edge of my applique fabric, I'm able to stop in the exact same spot. Now, you can do one of 2 things. You can either take a few stitches over so that then your echo quilting clip till it aligns with the previous row of stitching, or you can stop, tie off your threads, and then start again if you don't want to have that little line of stitching. I'm going to go ahead and make a little line of stitching because in this background fabric, I don't know in the end result that you're actually going to see where I moved my stitching over. So I'm simply just going to make a little line of stitching here, and I have now aligned my Echo Quilting clip with the outside edge of that previous row of stitching. And I'm going to start again, and I'm going to Echo Quilt around here. And again, I'm back to where I started. Now, if you don't want to have a line consistently going the same direction, I can always quilt back here just a little bit and start again. So for this, I am going to go ahead and quilt back up here to the top because of the fact that now all I'm going to do is quilt around this direction and just fill this side of the block. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch over my previous line of stitching until I get to the top. Okay, now I'm going to move just until my Echo Quilting clip is away from my stitching, and I'm going to start again. And I've come down. Now, the previous row of stitching is right on the outside edge of my clip here, and I am right in my seam line on this part. So what I can do is I can travel or stitch in the ditch just along my seam line if I want to, and come back and finish this Echo Quilting. So that's what I'm going to choose to do, is to freehand stitch in the ditch. I could use my straight edge ruler if I want to, and just keep everything lined up. And you can use your rulers with the Echo Quilting clips if you'd like. But I'm just going to freehand it. Okay. Now, the edge of my clip is lined up again with that outside edge of stitching. So once that's accomplished, I'm going to start. And again, I'm in my seam line, so I'm just going to come down a little bit. There we go. And you'll keep Echo Quilting and you'll get to where there's really not much of an area to go to. So I could try to come down here and just stitch this bottom part. I can always just pick that up at the end if I want to. But I'm going to go ahead and just stitch up my seam line here and just keep kind of following it back and forth. Okay. And now I'm done. So pull up my bobbin thread. And go ahead and snip it. And now I would also continue around this side and finish this side up. So stitching over my basting stitches is really no big deal at all, because in the end, I'm simply going to use a seam ripper and just rip out those basting stitches. And they do come out very, very easily. So that's never been a concern for me to actually stitch over my basting stitches. If it's a concern for you, you can always stop. And because we have the machine set to stop needle down, you can stop needle down in the area and you can just snip the basting stitches out of your way and then continue on with your quilting. So go ahead and finish all 4 of your letters. And then if you'd like, you can also do the Echo Quilting around your leaf shapes. Do keep in mind doing that the Echo Quilting around the leaves is they do have a little bit of a point. So you are going to want to make sure that you either stop and really highlight that point in your quilting, or if you round it off, that you keep that rounded off look in all of your quilting on your leaves. On my original project, I did a couple of the leaves where I did Echo Quilting, and then I did a couple of the leaves where I just did a background stipple and stippled in the background area. So go ahead and get your applique letters done with the Echo Quilting clips, and then join me back here, and the next part we'll talk about is doing ruler work, and we're going to work in our pieced block area. Okay, for this next part, we're going to use some of our new rulers that we have. So Bernina has 3 different ruler sets available that are our new long arm quilting rulers, or for the sit-down machines as well, but they are the quilting rulers. And so we have the basic set, and in the basic set there are several different rulers, but these particular 2, the long one and then the squiggle ruler, are a couple of rulers out of that set that I want to use. And so these 2 rulers we're going to use for our borders, so the outside edge and the borders. We're going to use the squiggle ruler inside of our leaves to kind of stitch like a vine or the vein of the leaf inside the leaf area. But I do want to talk about the fact that these rulers have several different markings on them, and it's just to help you align the rulers when you're using them. I do like the new addition here on this straight ruler, where I am able to stitch 1/4 inch. So this is really great when you're doing grid work quilting, or if you just need to stitch down 1/4 inch so that you can realign the ruler, or even stitch 1/2 inch and then realign the ruler. It's no more having to guess it. You can actually stitch in increments, and then you're lining up exactly, and it really does make a big difference. So I really do like this ruler for that. And then on our squiggle ruler, you can see here where it has a couple of lines, and this is simply for aligning it. So after I've stitched one line, then I can align either on this line or this line, and depending on which line I align the ruler on depends on how fat of the design is in between each of my squiggle stitches. And I'll show you that when we start working with this on the border. But we'll do something fun with this one in the leaves. And then this one here, this is part of our new border set, and this is the pointed leaf ruler. There's another one in the set that looks very similar to this, and it's called our oval ruler. And you can see here where I can stitch a pointed look, and it comes out looking like an elongated leaf. But this one is the one we're going to use next, and we're actually going to use this in our pieced blocks, and we're going to use this to do kind of an orange peel design. So go ahead and grab your leaf ruler from your border set, and we're going to start stitching into our pieced blocks. Let me put these ones away. Okay. Now, for this part, I do like to start in the center when I'm doing this. And on this particular ruler, I have figured that this side here, this arc here, is going to work best for stitching and doing kind of an orange peel look. So with that is I want to bring my bobbin thread up, and I always like to start in the center of my block. So I'm going to bring my bobbin thread up. I'm going to take my securing stitches. I'm going to simply just snip my threads out of the way. Okay, on this particular ruler, I have a couple of reference lines here, and I can align them on my seam line, and that is going to help me with making sure that these all look nice and even as I work my way around this block. So we're going to do kind of an orange peel stitching. So I'm going to start and I'm going to stitch this direction, and then you'll see where I'm going to move the ruler and we'll go around. And I'll just keep moving the ruler and stitching around. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this. You just want to make sure that you stitch on both sides of the center seams and only on the inside of these seams. I don't want to stitch off into my leaf area here, so I do want to make sure that I'm only using the ruler and aligning it to stitch just in the center. So you'll see what I mean here in a minute when we get started, but I'm going to go ahead and start in BSR2 because that's what we like to use. Okay, stop. Now I need to align my ruler so that I'm stitching on this inside edge. So I'm going to align it up, and I'm going to have this line on my seam line and this line here on my seam line. I'm going to start stitching, and if at any point you do need to adjust anything, just stop and make your adjustment. There I've stitched to the outside edge. Now I'm going to realign it, stitch again, stitch to the outside edge of that block. I think I'm going to go this direction and we'll come down the center. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. Again, there's really no right or wrong way of doing this. And if you need to adjust the ruler just a little bit, you can as you start stitching. But so that I end up exactly in the center, then this one I'm going to go here. And again, I ended up at the edge. So now I can circle back around. No, we're going to go back up. Sometimes you just have to think about things and play with your rulers just a little bit to make sure that you're going to end up with the design that you want. There we go. Now I can go around the edge here. And again, making sure that I don't stitch into my leaf, because that is definitely not where I want to go. The nice thing about our presser feet and our rulers is that I can stitch all the way around on all sides. So you're seeing here I'm using it from the back side. And then here this way. There we go. So it's kind of fun to be able to sit and do this. Okay, now I've gotten all the outside edges done, but I need to make sure I get this center part done. So with this, I need to start and stitch here, and then I'm probably going to stitch here, and I'll end back here at the center. So just so that you have an idea of kind of where we're going with the pattern. And then the last one. There we go. So now I have this kind of orange peel effect, and I stitch that with a ruler that you're actually has been designed to make pointed leaves. But it kind of gives it an elongated orange peel look, and it looks kind of neat. So I'm going to take my bobbin thread and pull it up. And I'm going to grab my scissors and cut my threads real quick. Okay. And so then in the center of this, you can see here where all my points meet nicely in the center. And honestly, that's where your eye is going to lay when you look at this quilt and when you look at these blocks, is your eye is going to lay in the center. So I always want to make sure that my center looks as good as possible. If I have to fudge a little bit on the edge, it's not as noticeable as it is if I have to fudge in the center of the block. So the next ruler that we're going to grab is I'm going to grab that squiggle ruler, and we're going to quilt one of these leaves, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with that. Okay, so I'm going to use this bigger edge of the squiggle ruler. And I have removed some basting stitches from this leaf here. So let's spin our quilt top around. And the nice thing about having this nice big table and work surface is I can keep everything spread out, and I can keep everything nice and flat, and I have plenty of room to work. So with this is really, I am simply just going to freehand this. There's no rhyme or reason There's no absolute perfect alignment on this. This is just kind of a decorative fun thing to do. And so I'm going to stitch in just what looks like some of the veins in the leaves. That's all. So on this one, all I did was I took this first squiggle and I decided to do the center part first, and I just kind of aligned it to where does it land that I like it. So I know my foot's going to come along here, and I could always move my squiggle up a little more if you want it to be a little more centered, or you can have it a little more off like this. And I actually think I kind of might like that design. So let's just give it a try here. I'm going to start and bring up my bobbin thread. And then I'm going to lower my presser foot and take my securing stitches real quick. Okay. Raise my presser foot. Snip my threads out of the way because I just don't like to have to deal with them. All right, here we go. I've got this lined up, lower my presser foot down, and I'm simply just going to stitch a curve. That looks good to me, and you kind of see I have a vein coming up through the middle of my leaf. Now, to get back down to the other side, I'm simply going to turn the ruler around and kind of line it up, and you see it's going to kind of give me this elongated diamond look. And you can keep moving the ruler around depending on how much or how little of this look you want. So I'm happy with that. Go ahead and stitch it. And I'm just going to stitch back to my stitching and stop. Now, I want to do something out here in the sides. So again, I'm just going to align this ruler. And remember that I'm going to, wherever I go out, I'm going to come back. And you can simply do echo quilting if you want. Excuse me, not echo quilting. You can retravel down this same line, or again, switch the ruler over, and it kind of gives you these fun diamond effects, I guess, in the center of this leaf. But it's just kind of a fun, whimsical look. There's really no rhyme or reason for the alignment. You can see here where I'm kind of trying to align it up a little bit. And I've decided that that looks good. Kind of go there. And come back. Now I'm going to come back and stop here because I do want to try and end my stitching where I began. So I'm going to line it up on that curve again and come back down and stop real close to the end here. So just a fun little way to use that squiggle ruler and do your leaves. Bring up your bobbin thread. Of course, take your securing knots and snip your threads out of the way. All right, we're going to use this same ruler, and we are now going to continue. You can even do just your straight edge ruler if you want to, and even I think some cross hatching or a plaid look in some of these leaves might be kind of fun. Just use your rulers and make sure that you do stitch down in the leaf area. We've stitched the background down. On this one I did a stippling look. On this one I did the echo quilting look, but this is a big enough area here that's not quilted that I feel like for the type of batting I'm using, I do need to have some type of quilting in here. So go ahead and finish up your leaves and your center squares. And when you get all of that done, then we'll go ahead and talk about stitching our borders. Okay, we've got the center of our quilt quilted, and now we're going to move to the borders. So in the golden area of my border, both my long border and my short border, I did the squiggle ruler, and this is kind of a fun ruler because it kind of gives you a wave effect. And lining this up is actually pretty easy, and I do really, like I said before, I really like these new reference lines that we have on our new set of rulers. They are extremely helpful. So for this particular design, I am going to align up the second line here on the ruler of the squiggle, because when I stitch, I'm going to come down, and I don't want to stitch into my background here. I want to stitch above my background. So I've aligned this second line here with my ruler. Now, for starting and stopping, I'm going to use my border here versus trying to stitch around this border and keep a nice consistent line of the quilting. I'm going to start and stop in the seam, and it just kind of hides my stitches very well. So I'm going to take my few securing stitches here, okay, and I'm going to snip my thread. Just so that I get them out of the way. All right, presser foot is lowered, and I'm going to make sure that my ruler's aligned. And you're also going to get a taste of what it's like to use this ruler for a longer period here. So there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to come down, and I'm going to stitch. The thing with this ruler I have found is if I need to stop, I have a really nice reference line here at the top of each of these little hills, and I have a reference line here at the bottom of each of these little valleys. So if I do need to stop, I can stop when my foot on my, when my presser foot that's got its indentation here and its reference mark aligns with one of my lines. I can stop and then readjust if I need to before I continue stitching. But the other thing about this is now I'm ready to move my ruler to continue doing this long border. So when I move my ruler, if I move it and align again that line in the hill with my presser foot, now everything is going to line up perfectly, and I can continue doing this nice long border. And stop, readjust. Okay, realign everything. And I'm going to stitch right to my seam line and stop. Okay, now I can use this edge of my ruler here to stitch in the ditch and just stitch up until I need to realign it. So with that being said, now I've got it aligned and I'm going to move up. Again, I'm still using this bottom line. You can use the top line and your stitching will be 1/4 inch apart for this border. The math worked out very easily that I want it to be 1/2 inch apart, so I'm just going to align this up with the previous row of stitching and stitch down. And now I can move it and get a bigger section done if I want. The thing I have found with ruler work quilting is, especially with these longer rulers, I don't want to stitch any farther than what I can comfortably control with my hands. So if you're doing ruler work quilting and you feel like the ruler is kicking out or kicking away from you, you need to stop and reposition your hands, because you definitely don't want to run into the ruler and have your presser foot or your machine crash down on the ruler. So for me, on this longer border, it is a lot of stopping and starting, but I love the end result, so it's worth the effort. Again, stitching the ditch up just a little bit using that straight edge of the ruler. Realign everything. And let's see. I actually need to stitch up just a little bit farther. There we go. Now everything's aligned. Ooh, I went really far that time. But you can see it's giving me a nice wave texture effect, and my waves are very nice, evenly spaced as I continue quilting. Go ahead and continue doing this part for your golden borders or your half of your outside edge border. You can do this for all of it. but I thought it was fun to have the visual element of two different types of quilting. So get this part done and then join me back, and we're going to grab that straight edge ruler and stitch in this kind of rust colored border. All right, now that we're on to our second border, we're going to be using the straight line ruler from our basic ruler kit. And for this one, I want to line up this first dotted line on the reference, this first reference line on the ruler with my seam line is where I'm going to align that. So I'm going to go ahead and I brought up my bobbin thread. I'm going to take my securing stitches and I'm going to stop. I do like to lift my presser foot out of the way so that I can snip my stitches real quick and lower my presser foot. And now I'm going to align my ruler and I'm going to start stitching. I'm going to stop, realign everything. So again, aligning the line on my ruler with my seam line. Go ahead and keep stitching across. And I'm going to stitch all the way to the seam line here where the rust and the golden come together. Now, because on this ruler, I have the reference lines here. I love this, that I can easily stitch up 1/4 of an inch. And now I realign my ruler. Okay. And back to the other side. The key to straight line ruler quilting is that you want to make sure that your ruler is aligned nice and straight the first time, and then you should have a nice straight line to quilt on or realign to so that you get this nice straight line quilting. Again, stitch just to the seam. I could stitch completely off the edge here if I wanted to, and then when I start doing this one, it'd give me like this little checkerboard look. That's something kind of cute that you can do. But for this particular exercise, I'm just stitching back and forth. So I'm going to line this up, stitch in the ditch, up 1/4 inch, and keep working my way across. So go ahead and stitch your short border and your long border using this ruler, and then we will talk about finishing off your project. So get that done and join me back here for some more stitching. Okay, so we've stitched both the long borders. I've stitched the wave border in the golden part, and then I did some simple straight line quilting in the rust color border. And then, then I trim up everything, all my edges nice and even, and then you're going to add your binding. And when you add your binding, you also may want to add a hanging sleeve, since this is a fall wall hanging. So go ahead and make a little hanging sleeve. I typically cut my hanging sleeves at about 4.5 inches, and then I fold them over and give them a good press so that the raw edges are together. And then I'm going to attach my raw edge to the raw edge of my quilt and sew the hanging sleeve on my top side, on the back, of course. And then after that, add your binding. And when you finish your binding off here on the back, it covers the raw edges for you. And so you're left with just a nice hanging sleeve for the back of your quilt. Just hand stitch it down. Thank you for joining me for this Bernina Community Studio lesson. Find more lessons like this at your local Bernina dealer.